Fantastic. Rukmani? Rukmani is somewhere. Okay. Sarah, if you can also sit here, because we'll just be... Please do have a look at the program book. It's all in your wonderful goodie bag. I think it's going to be a challenge deciding which session to go to, but and so delighted that so many of you will be presenting. This is, indeed wonderful gathering. As we are about to begin, I think it's worth pondering, and being South Asia, we are all looking for auspicious signs. Remember, it was going to be 5th and 6th March in Islamabad, Pakistan, and now it's 5th and 6th November 2019 in Kathmandu. The stars must be aligned. And if I'm going to ask Aizil, who's very kindly, who's the communications lead in the PAN network, that we will try and send you off the social media kit, and in fact put up on the conference website where you can download and help us propagate those messages, and of course beyond, as you wish, so that we get a good global coverage for the PAN network conference. Is Aizil here? Aizil, are you here? Maybe she's not here. जी and Pakistan. They said I'm supposed to be the chair, but actually I'm the MC. Whatever that is, we're just workers here. We will have an opportunity after the keynote addresses, hopefully, for a Q&A, a brief Q&A. So look forward to that as well. So that across the 2 days we have indeed some provocative conversations going, and we'll be all in search for some solutions to our questions. In your program booklets, pages 8 to 12 is where the full program is. There might be slight changes, but only very slight. And perhaps there'll all be value additions. A very warm welcome to our chief guest, the Honorable Honorable Minister for Education, Science and Technology of Nepal, Mr. Giriraj Mani Pokharel, to the People's Action for Learning Network Conference 2019. Let's give a big round of applause. Sir, can we have you at stage? We're about to begin now with our chief guest seated. May I request our two keynote speakers, Professor Lang Pritchard and Dr. Rukmini Banerjee, to also take the seats on the stage. And may I request Dr. Sarah Ruto and our co-host, Dr. Rajeev, also to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, thought and action leaders and practitioners, we welcome all of you, and once again our chief guest, the Honorable Minister for Education, Science and Technology of Nepal, Mr. Giriraj Mani Pokharel, to the People's Action for Learning Network Conference 2019. Today is indeed a very auspicious day for all of us who have committed to all children learning everywhere in the world, making them visible no matter how invisible they may be, because we know that they can and will learn. The conference in Kathmandu, Nepal symbolizes the resilience of South Asia. The conference shifted from March 5th to 6th, 2019 to November 5th to 6th, 2019. It is auspicious in many ways, not just for the dates and the co-hosting by Nepal, Asar Pakistan and Asar Nepal, but because we, the people of Asia, Africa and Americas, representing 5 out of the 9 most populous countries of the world, with partners from the rest of the world, have milestones as well as challenges to share. We celebrate the recent Nobel Prize in Economics won by Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo and Michael Kramer for their experimental approach to alleviating poverty, global poverty, through field trials and experimental research. And as a result of their studies on what works, how and why, more than 5 million Indian children have benefited from the programs of remedial tutoring in schools. Abhijit and Duflo are closely associated with Pratham's programs as a laboratory for their work. Pratham is a pioneer, anchor partner, and leader, and the reason to be for the People's Action for Learning Network. We also celebrate the recent upgradation of SDG 4.1.1 indicator to Tier 1 category due to the efforts of many partners, including the members of the PAL network, who have been working tirelessly with UNESCO's Institute of Statistics to ensure rigor of what we measure so that child-centered actions for learning remain a serious, measurable business, where every exclusion is a provocation for inclusion, be it due to disability, poverty, early marriages, sickness, conflict, and displacement. And we know this well in the regions of the South-South initiative of the Nepal network. We came together in 2015, and in these 4 years, we have remained restless in our efforts to expand our effort and scope of work, membership, ensuring a twin focus on assessment and actions for learning concurrently, and reinventing, recalibrating, and upgrading efforts for ensuring our solutions are second to none. The conference has been in incubation for the past 18 months, with committees that worked across 3 continents and several countries, supported by our friends at the Real Center, Cambridge University, to ensure that we could identify the next generation researchers. Okay, sorry, I must speak slowly for the translators. The next generation researchers, activists, using the PAL network open source data, and thanks to them, the winners of the student competition are here with us to present their work. We are also about to evidence and, more importantly, see intergenerational multipliers, as indeed that should be the purpose of a people's-led action network. You will no doubt be stimulated by the conference sharing from the network initiative. Many other partners from across the world over the next 2 days. From Islamabad to Kathmandu, the South Asia hub of the network is delighted to bring to you more enriched and meaningful conversations. We honor your precious global presence, and we thank all of you who are here, saluting our global, loyal keynote speakers and also presenters from Pakistan and all the other countries who are present here, deeply invested in the purpose of the conference. We thought that many of the speakers from Pakistan would be lost because the conference shifted from Islamabad to Kathmandu. But we are pleased to see that many of them have decided to invest and come here themselves. We honor your faith in our journey towards all children learning lessons on equity and inclusion from the South. I now have the honor of inviting Dr. Rajiv Tamilsina, co-director of ASAR Nepal and assistant professor at Tribhuvan University, who's committed to peace education and inclusive learning in integrated classrooms. And also that will be followed by Dr. Sarah Ruto, the eminent educator, activist, and the Chief Executive Officer of the PAL Network, to welcome you to this conference. Dr. Rajiv and Dr. Ruto.
Madam Chair and Honorable Minister Vidazamani Pokhrel, and PAL Network members, all the delegates and friends. So standing here, it is reminding me my childhood days. It was 120 kilometers south from here, in outskirts of a small town. I was going in primary schools. There were more than 200 people with me when I was going to my primary school. And when I completed my high school, there were only 5 of us. We 5 crossed high school, and when I was preparing for this conference, I was reflecting why my other 195 friends, they couldn't make it, or why they stopped learning in school. Before being professor at university, I was also teaching at high school. And I was also like other teachers, giving assignments, giving deadlines, being strict to them. So one day, I was giving assignment to my students. 5 pages, do this and submit Monday. And one student came to me and said, "Sir, I really want to make sure what you have asked us to do. I am not feeling well. I want to do this next month. Is it okay?" I was not flexible teacher at that time like others. Now, when I became researcher and I started exploring some questions, how to ensure all children learn. Few questions I just found for me and for all of us, like, is it important to have children to learn the way we want? Or is that we want them to learn on the exact day, exact time we want, or they can learn anytime? One crucial question. Also, is it okay if the children not willing to do written test? They want to just show us that they have learned something by other means. Is it okay if they are not willing to learn only inside the classroom? They also want to grow or learn together in the community with friends and families and other friends. So, These questions take us to the broad discussion beyond the class, narrow classroom boundaries only. I think the inclusion for me, it should be with everything very broadly. That means, in a way, we have to treat children as a human being with families, friends, with likes, with dislikes. They have also their interests, their emotions. So learning can't be isolated from other nature of human beings. I think now here I am privileged to welcome you all the renowned scholars, educationists, experts to discuss about our main agenda, ensuring all children learn to next stage. So Nepal consider friendship to many nations. So we are happy to get chance to host this conference here. Host you all like different delegates, scholars and people here, and organize this to have very important discussion on how we can all put our efforts, how we can all contribute, and how we can reflect upon what kind of model can ensure, help to us to ensure all our children learn. So I welcome Honorable Minister et al. As Chief Guest. I also welcome our keynote speakers. I welcome all PAL Network family members and all the delegates. Let's make our time best here. Let's conclude with something that we can contribute for many policymakers, implementers, and also for all of us. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, my task is very simple, to introduce you. There have been some deep insights over there, and we have our keynote speakers coming. So, Mr. Minister, sir, I just wanted to let you know who is in the room in broad terms. There are some papers, colored papers in front of you. Could each of you take a piece, please? Can you see papers in front of you? Each person needs at least one. Does everyone have one? Perfect. Now put them down. So once I say and you identify with what I'm saying, raise your paper up, okay? Because I know many of you have got multiple identities, and that's okay, because we want to understand who is in this room so that we can understand the various perspectives we are hoping to get and the various challenges. Nobody is going to come and just say the same thing. We want to challenge ourselves on what we need to be doing. So, if you are a member of the PAL network, please raise your card. Members of the PAL network? So can you say welcome in whichever language you want? Okay, we at least represent about 10 languages, maybe more. Now, if you are from the Asia hub of the PAL network, please raise your card. Thank you. If you are from the East and Southern African hub of the PAL network, please raise your card. West Africa hub of the PAL network, please raise your card. Oh, you're so few, you need to recruit more members. And then from the Americas hub of the PAL network, oh, you're doing a little bit badly, so you need to do some more work. So those are the hub members of the PAL network, and we operate in those hubs. Now, we are going to introduce ourselves by continents. Anyone from Australia? Oh, you have to give him a clap. I wasn't certain. Definitely no one from Antarctica. From Europe? From the Americas? From Africa? From Asia? So we are truly global when we say we are global. Thank you very much. Now, if you are from government, please raise your card. Okay. Prime Minister, Mr. Minister would also have raised his card, so at least there will be 3 of you. From a civil society organization. Thank you. Researcher from the universities. Thank you. Students. Oh, we need more of you next time. Thank you. From the bilaterals, multilaterals, funders, please raise your cards. Thank you very much. Finally, how many of you are from Nepal, the hosts? Please tell us welcome in your language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rajiv and Sarah. That really set the context and also the presence of a truly global community in pursuit of learning. It is now indeed a great pleasure on behalf of the PAN Network and this conference to invite the Honorable Minister for Education, Science and Technology of Nepal, Mr. Giriraj Mani Pokharel, to say a few words. I know he's short of time, and then that will be followed by our keynote speakers. The Honorable Minister.
Chair of the inaugural session, delegates from the PAL network, academics, researchers, scholars, and all the friends. Namaste, good morning. I want to begin by extending to you a warm welcome to Nepal. Besides your important work in this conference, I hope you will also have time to enjoy the beauty of Nepal and the hospitality of the Nepali people. I am pleased to see that people from many countries, including from the SAARC region, were able to gather here to discuss the important issues of how we improve the quality of our children's education. Nepal, which offers its friendship to all nations, can play an important role in being a place for dialogue and conversation, both for the region and the world. Our government has designated 2020 a Visit Nepal year to further this goal. I hope your family and your friends will visit us again next year. The government of Nepal and my ministry share with all of you a deep commitment to improving the quality of education that our children receive. In the last 30 years, the government of Nepal has made tremendous gains in education. A significant investment in educational infrastructure has also resulted in schools that are more comfortable and suitable for learning than they were previously. As a result, we have been very successful at getting more and more children to school. Our primary enrollment rate is now over 95%, ensuring that most children are going to school. These achievements deserve to be recognized and celebrated. Under my leadership, the government is building on these achievements. Me and my team at the Ministry of Education are now focused on 3 things. First, having brought children to school, we want to keep them there. Thus, improving retention and attendance is a key priority. Second, we need to build citizens that are skilled and capable of generating their own livelihoods and contributing to the development of the nation. We have introduced many programs and policies towards this goal, including a greater investment in STEM education. Third, the primary education system needs to provide strong literacy and numeracy skills to all children. None of our other national goals, including the government's vision of creating a prosperous Nepal and a happy Nepali, can be achieved without achieving this. Thus, focusing on the quality of basic education is a key priority of mine. I would like to share with you some activities and policies our government is undertaking to ensure our three key priorities. To improve retention, we will focus on the holistic development of all our four pillars of education systems: teachers, students, infrastructure, and administration. For example, our Green Schools initiative is encouraging schools to utilize their grounds to plant greenery. The emphasis of this initiative is on growing edible plants that will improve the aesthetic look of the schools, will provide students hands-on skills with farming, but also provide nutrition that may be lacking. To improve the capacity of our youth to earn their own livelihoods, my government is focused on integrating a STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, component into all of our national education policies, including our SDG 4 action plan. We are committed to creating education innovation centers around Nepal that can both localize innovation and create bottom-up contextual innovation. We hope the lessons learned from these initiatives will be useful to other developing countries in the future. To improve foundational skills, we have to first measure them. As previous governments were not focused on ensuring high quality foundational skills, we have started from creating a baseline. Our Education Review Office is working on a minimum competency assessment to complement other learning data, such as the National Assessment of Students' Achievement. The government of Nepal is open to the support of other researchers and experts, including those from PAL network, to understand how we can measure our progress. However, it is clear to me and my team that we must change the very nature of our schools to achieve this goal. We must move from a rote-based education system to a research-based one. Through all these efforts, the government of Nepal will remain the main implementer, but we are eager to collaborate with scholars and experts to gather better data to assist us. I want to thank the PAL network for choosing Nepal to host this important conference. I also want to thank the network for inviting me as the chief guest in this conference. I was very pleased to learn that the PAL network is the collective effort of the citizens from the global south. In looking through the data presented to me in the briefing, I was also happy to know that your pioneering work helped the recent Nobel laureates in economics understand how to reduce poverty better. I was even more impressed that this network has mobilized over 7 lakh youth volunteers around the world. I want to thank you for engaging the youth and helping them understanding their social responsibilities better. The future of all our nations is dependent on us learning how to make our youth both more knowledgeable and better citizens. Over the last few weeks, I have been leading very intensive discussions about to nationalize and achieve the SDG goals in Nepal. I am pleased to know that over the next 2 days, so many experts, researchers, and educators will be having similar discussion at this conference. Before I conclude these remarks, I wish to share with my hope and give you a responsibility. It is my hope that the discussion here will be fruitful and result in the specific learning that policymakers and implementers, such as the government of Nepal, can learn from all as well as act on. I wish to give you the responsibility of transferring the fruits of your discussions back to national governments, including mine. Together, I believe that we can really achieve this theme of this conference and ensure that all children learn. I extend my very best wishes for the success of the conference. Have a pleasant stay in Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and my goodness, what priorities, holistic education approaches, STEAM as part of policy and embedded in the whole process of learning, producing creative innovation centers, and foundational learning with great evidence for improvement. Now, what more can we want, sir? And we really salute you for the great progress Nepal has made. We are indeed honored that you are going to spare a little bit more time with us so that we can have our amazing keynote speakers. We have 3 keynote speakers, of which 2 will be presenting today and 1 tomorrow. I have the great honor of inviting Professor Land Pritchard, who's the Research Director at the Research on Improving Systems of Education, RISE, at the Blavatnik School of Government, University of Oxford. He has been the Professor of the Practice of International Development at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and my goodness, he is a great provocator. So be ready. Here we invite Professor Land Pritchard.
I guess I'm supposed to focus on my first slide for until they can locate how to advance the slides. Rukmini, unlike the order that was presented there, Rukmini's asked me to go first, knowing that having been exposed to me, you'll like her even better. I'm the speaker, I find, I'm not quite sure why, but I get invited to speak a lot of places once. I think my speech today may well illustrate for you, if not for me, why that's so. Could we just move to the first slide? So I want to start with a story. So don't move it forward yet. I want to start with a story that my friend just told me a little while ago that I think is illustrative of many of the challenges the PAL network faces, which is a friend of his was getting married, and his wife had this beloved cat, Duke. And this cat, Duke, was not a particularly social cat, even by cat standards. And so his new wife was very worried that as they went on their honeymoon, who would take care of Duke, who, wasn't the easiest cat to take care of. So he agreed to fly out to California and take care of their cat, Duke, while this new couple went on their honeymoon. And so they had arranged that he had the keys to the house and he would house sit and Duke sit while they were gone. So he showed up, and they had left during the day, so he showed up from his work meetings, opened the door to the house, and as he opened the door, boom, this tabby cat shoots out the door. So he's not even taken care of the cat for a minute, and the cat's outside, and they told him the cat stayed in the house all the time, so didn't know what to do, spent hours searching the neighborhood, couldn't find the cat, I don't know what to do, went to bed. Fortunately, he woke up the next morning, opened the door, and this tabby cat strolled right in. It's like, okay, well, I'll feed him. And then as the week wore on, the cat was just very friendly, and he fed the cat, and the cat started sitting next to him on the couch as he, watched TV in the evenings, and he thought, I'm doing a terrific job sitting with this cat, because they said this cat didn't like anybody, but he's really warm to me. So he had to go back on Friday, and so he had left in the morning, and his friends arrived Friday evening, and Friday evening his friend got back, and he called his friend and said, well, I think I did a really good job with the cat Duke. He really warmed up to me, all was really good. And he says, well, yeah, I think you really did a really good job of taking care of the cat. It's just the cat's not Duke. So all week he had been taking care of some other cat that had happened to stroll into the house in the morning, thinking, what better deal than to have some guy take care of me and pet me and feed me during the week, thinking that I'm Duke. The point of this story is, you only have to be wrong about one thing for all of your well-meaning efforts to actually not achieve the objective that you were attempting to achieve. So he did everything he could to be a good cat sitter to the cat Duke, other than he wasn't actually cat sitting the cat Duke. So from that story, let's move on. And I want to start and move to much of what I do today around education I can blame on Rukmini Banerjee. I would say give credit, but we'll see. I think the ASR group just did, after having successfully tested young children and children in school, sort of 5 to 15 for more than a decade, they decided to do a Beyond Basics assessment where they assessed the skills of those that were 14 to 17. So 14 to 17, that were kind of leaving the schooling experience into further schooling and work. And, when they said beyond basics, they didn't go very far beyond basics in the sense that they asked some really unbelievably simple questions. Like this question, this girl goes to sleep at 9:30 p.m., wakes up at 6:30 a.m., how many hours did the girl sleep? This is like a graph, right? It's presented like this. So this isn't even like a mathematics thing. This isn't even an addition challenge. You literally can count this out on your fingers, which is how I would do it. I wouldn't even set it up as a math problem. I think 10, 30, 11, 30. Okay. Here's the amazing thing. children with less than 8 years of complete, in the ages 14 to 18, only a quarter of them got this question right. That already is really worrisome, because you effectively can't use time if you can't answer this question. What's shocking is that only 41% with 8 or more years of schooling could answer this question. What's even more shocking is that only about half of youth who were enrolled as undergraduates in tertiary schooling could answer this question correctly. I have labeled this the Great Betrayal, because these children were told, come to school, go to school, and we will prepare you for your future. Your future will be different and bright because we will unlock the opportunities of the world for you through the schooling process. And there's a great film that accompanies the Beyond Basics, where they talk to these youth about what their ideas of their future career are, and they've been to school. They expect to have good jobs and work in white-collar settings and go on to university, and yet the schooling process has completely betrayed them, because it has not, in fact, conveyed to them even the most barest minimums of the skill sets that they would actually need to succeed. And so in this very poignant film, they talk to these kids about what their hopes and aspirations are, and then try and probe whether or not they're the least bit aware and prepared for what it would actually take to realize those aspirations, and just a massive gap between the aspirations they have and the skill sets that they have been equipped with through the schooling they've gotten. Now, as I was reading this report, I was chagrined, disappointed, angry, and then I realized that I had been working in India on the subject of education since these children started school. So this wasn't somebody else's problem. This was my problem. I had been thinking, I had been working and promoting and trying to encourage the education system to get better, and yet while I was working away and writing papers and doing stuff, another generation of youth have just had the most critical period in which it would have been possible to equip them with skills completely frittered away by the education process they actually got. And so I'm part of the Great Betrayal. I am complicit in dashing implicitly the hopes and dreams of children by egging them into a process of formal schooling that is making promises that it is not delivering on. Am I coming with a clicker? What's going on? Like, how come they're not? So what I want to do is I want to give you a fair amount of doom and gloom. And then I want to use the doom and gloom as a way of introducing to the PAL network, what is it that you think you're going to do that's going to change this? And the basic of the doom and gloom is, if you ask me what I think is going to happen over the next 15 years that will actually lead to a qualitative acceleration in the improvement of learning of children, the answer is nothing. I think the momentum of the given education systems around the world in their formal structures are honed into processes and practices that they are not going to change in a way that's going to lead to higher learning. And my suspicion is when Beyond Basics or any assessment is done 15 years from now, or even 11 years from now, or this is 2030, which is the supposed SDG, they're going to find zero progress on learning outcomes. Let me give you the reasons why I think that's true. So first of all, next slide. The Oh, that can't be the next slide. Oh, yes, sorry. And then after the doom and gloom, we'll talk a little bit about, I think, PAL conceives itself as a disruptive insurgency. If anything's going to change the status quo, it's likely going to be not led and directed by the existing organizations, because, you know, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if we want to predict what ministries of education are going to do for the next 5 years, pretty good guess is they're going to do what they've done for the previous 5 years and the previous 10 years. So if that's going to change, and there's going to be some ray of hope in the doom and gloom, it's going to be likely, in my view, from a disruptive insurgency. And I just want to ask the question, how does a disruptive insurgency come to have scaled impact? Next slide. So the first thing is, the theme of this conference, and using the word inclusion, I think gets you off on the wrong path altogether to start with. There's nothing to be included into. So look at the PISA D results, which just came out for 7 of the countries that participated in the PISA D. Of course, the PISA D was an effort to push towards the ASSER-like assessments, because basically the top code of ASSER was below the bottom code of PISA. And so PISA was moving ASSER's way in trying to assess the lower skill sets. Well, the blue bars are the kind of a typical OECD country, the Netherlands. And I tend to use the Netherlands as an example because never met anybody who really cared about the Netherlands. So it's kind of a neutral example. Any other country you use, people have a view about it. You know, if I use the US, everybody in the room would go ballistic about the US, or have some view on the US, but no one has a view on the Netherlands. So, typical OECD country, innocuous. And then this is the distribution from Guatemala. So, kind of where the OECD is and what the OECD thinks of as inclusion is getting the bottom of the blue bars towards the upper of the blue bars. But in Guatemala, nobody's there. There's nobody in the good learning outcomes. There's no good learning outcomes to push you towards. So, next slide. So, kind of the inclusion agenda in the Netherlands is kind of, they're worried that there's 23% of the population, 22 or 23% of the population that isn't in the high-performing part. So if we took the SDG, which is some interpretation of the SDG as level 2 of PISA or above, constitutes adequate learning at leaving secondary, 78% of the Netherlands is at that already, and the inclusion agenda is to keep the lower performing students that are likely disadvantaged in some obvious social way into the performance that's already there for the vast majority of the population. That's an inclusion agenda. Well, here's Cambodia. Next slide. This is what Cambodia looks like. At level 2, of kids who took the exam, 7.2% are at level 2, and 0.3% are at level 3 or above. Level 3 is kind of, if any of our children were at level 3 performance, we would be emotionally and otherwise distraught at what their future was going to be. And there's nobody there. So the inclusion agenda is what? We've got 72% of the kids in Cambodia aren't reaching grade 10 or aren't in school at grade 15, so they're not being assessed by PISA. But it can't possibly be your goal to include kids from not being enrolled to being enrolled at age 15, but 90% of them can't read at level 2 or above. Is that really an inclusion agenda? There's nothing to be included into. The elite, the middle class, the privileged of these countries are getting a terrible education. Nobody's there. If only 0.3% of the kids are there, it means, let's say you take the top 5% of the population as your elite, it means nearly all of the elite aren't at level 3 or above. Just by math, right? If there's 5% of the kids in the elite, and only 0.3% of all the kids in the country are at this level, then even if all of those kids were from the elite, most of the elite aren't at that level. Okay. So, first doom and gloom is there's nothing there to be included into. So talking about your agenda as inclusion like you were the Netherlands or other OECD countries where most kids that weren't disadvantaged are getting a decent education, and then translating policies and practices of inclusion is just missing the point entirely. Second doom and gloom. It gets worse. Next slide. So, one of the research teams within RISE works on Indonesia, and they took advantage of the fact that a panel survey has been following cohorts in Indonesia for quite a long time, and so has been asking cohorts of youth in a non-school setting, so they have a universal sample of youth, not just those enrolled, over time, and they've been asking them some pretty simple arithmetic questions, and have come up with some really shocking results. And the basic result is, in the 14 years between 2000 and 2014, lots of kids went to lots more school. So 20 percentage points of the population more finished 12 years of schooling. And the performance of the cohort, the fraction of the cohort that could actually answer simple arithmetic, didn't go up at all. So you had massive success, more kids in school, more money spent, per capita teacher salaries doubled. Indonesia is not a dysfunctional country, everything chugging along. But the problem is that there's almost no learning going on. So if you look at the children currently enrolled in school, whether they can do a simple division like 56 divided by 84 can be reduced as a fraction 2 on a multiple choice test. The kids who were in grade 11 and the kids who were in grade 5 perform almost exactly the same. So, simple primary school arithmetic question. It only gets up to about 40% and then stays there. Year in, year out, kids pitching up, going to school, dressing in their uniform, carrying their books, sitting in a classroom, zilch, nada, in terms of what they learn. On this particular metric, my suspicion is. And then if you look overall, next slide, if you look at overall some more sophisticated IRT weighted, combination of all of the different arithmetic questions, same thing. They kind of learn up to about grade 5, 6, and then grade 6 on. And it's not that it's not that it maxes out because everybody can do it. This isn't that it plateaus at 80 or 90. It plateaus at 34. So the typical question is answered right 34% of the time on primary school arithmetic questions. It's just they kind of learn it, but if they don't get it early, they never get it later, and yet they persist in school forever. So next slide. So the typical youth, 18 to 24, answered 35% of the questions right in 2000. 14 years later, tripled student spending, doubled teacher salaries, I'm sure implemented all kinds of wonderful donor-preferred education and quality improvement plans. 20 percentage points more of this youth population had completed secondary school. The fraction that could answer these simple arithmetic hadn't budged at all. So, my suspicion is the future in your country looks like the recent past in Indonesia. This is what you're going to find. You're going to push a lot more kids through school, and the actual cohort skills acquired are going to stagnate. I'm saying this because Indonesia is a well-functioning country. Indonesia is like actually on the PISA test is at 400 already. It's well above all the PISA B countries. And it's actually doing stuff. Next slide. So, and this is trying to bring together lots and lots of things we've done using lots of the data that's been generated by Asser and Tuweza and others that allows us to look at learning profiles over time. The problem is only about a third of the kids in the PISA countries, and this is kind of anchored on Cambodia, only about a third of the kids are tested when they're age 15, and to be tested in the PISA you had to be in grade 7 or higher. So you might have been in school at 15, but you were in grade less than 7, so you were well off track. Of the kids that got tested, the OECD 16th percentile is about 400, and the 95th percentile of the third that got tested was 405. So again, the elite are at a standard deviation below a typical OECD student. And then the other 2/3, we don't even know where they are because they've dropped out. And the key question is, what do their learning profiles look like? What would they have learned had they stayed in school? There's good reasons to believe that they probably dropped out, in part because they weren't learning. So it's not obvious that they would have learned even what those in school learned. So next slide. So and I was going to spend a lot of time on the technicalities of this paper that I'm about finishing, would be finishing if I weren't speaking here. What we do is we try and just kind of simulate what the learning process looks like that's capable of generating the results we observe, and then say, in that model, what would happen if every kid stayed in school? Well, an easy and kind of intuitive way to mathematically represent the learning function is that kind of what gets taught moves ahead a certain amount every year, but it kind of moves ahead in a way that leaves those that start off behind increasingly behind to where they're not learning anything even if they stay in school. And we have a number of good learning profile exercises that show this, which means when we do this simulation, here's the result. Next slide. So the blue bars are kind of the learning levels, and this is all sort of scaled to PISA equivalents that we're kind of used to. 500 is the OECD mean. And then the red is what would happen in this model if somehow you manage to achieve universal enrollment through grade 10. What you might notice is that nothing at all happens if you say, what fraction of kids are going to be above 400? It doesn't change at all. Because every kid who was going to be above 400 was in school. They were staying in school because they were learning, because they were at the top of the distribution, and hence their learning doesn't change by staying in school because they were in school. And the only gains happen at this very low end, but it's so low that it's not obvious that's like a huge victory. Like the PISA scale really de facto bottoms out near 200, and all of the gains happen below 200. Everybody gets what I'm saying, right? If your current, and this is from adding 60% of the population through to grade 10. So you could see this as a tremendous victory of inclusion. Kids are staying in school. On the other hand, it's a perfectly plausible way to model the actual learning processes that are reproducing the results we're observing. Is in that model, the inclusion would lead to exactly zero progress on any cohort learning goal. the fraction meeting the SDG would not go up at all. Okay, I think that's near enough. Let's see, I hope I don't have more doom and gloom. Good, phew. Okay, we're done with the doom and gloom, except to say that the prospects of changing organization, or organizational change, is unbelievable harder than we always pretend it is. We always say, oh, well, okay, we're not doing so well, but let's pull our bootstraps together and get the bit done. I want to make the point that it's really hard for all organizations to change, no matter what they do. And it's even harder if they've been successful at something. So, given that education systems have in fact been successful at expanding schooling and putting more and more kids in school, what we should expect them to do is to continue to do what they've done successfully in the past. So if you give a schooling system a choice between a fundamental reform that would lead to more learning, or just building out the existing system either backwards to put kids at younger ages into formal schooling or forwards into putting more and more school into higher and higher grades, I can guarantee you what the choice will be. Because all organizations have enormous amounts of inertia and resistance to change, particularly when they can see themselves as having been successful. And even when they fail, it's amazing how hard it is to get them to change. So, next slide. Just to choose an array of examples, the Catholic Church lost all of Northern Europe. Wouldn't have been that hard in some sense to cope with this Martin Luther character? Like some slightly crazed academic pastor in some out-of-the-way place in the forests of Germany. Couldn't have been that hard for the Catholic Church to placate and keep them from preventing. But the Catholic Church was unable to reform sufficiently and lost all of Northern Europe essentially to a different religious tradition which has persisted to this day. So, just crazy examples. Second example, next slide. The US military. I was born in 1959. To anyone who was born in or around my age, this is a particularly searing image to an American. This is the fall of Saigon. The US military, which regarded itself as the most powerful military force in the world, got its ass kicked. And it got its ass kicked not in a year, not in 2 years, but over a decade, and couldn't bring itself to make the changes necessary to either not get its ass kicked and get out, or to actually be successful militarily. Because the organization wanted to fight with tanks in Eastern Europe. And that's what it was prepared to do. That's what it wanted to do. That's what it got budget to do. And when it was told, you kind of have to fight an insurgency in the jungles of South Asia, they said, let's fight that war in the way that we would have fought with tanks in Eastern Europe. And they got their ass kicked. And they got their ass kicked year after year after year. And an organization full of extremely intelligent, extremely well-trained people couldn't bring themselves to change the organizational practices. It's just too hard. This happens in the private sector. Big, effective, with all the high stakes of all of the pressure of a market, go bankrupt all the time. Like Sears. You know what Sears dominated? Mail order. You know what Amazon dominates? Mail order. You might ask yourself, why is Sears bankrupt and Amazon worth $1 gazillion billion? The answer is, Sears had to make changes in the way that it responded to an evolving environment in which retailing was done, and they couldn't do it. Even though, if you had gone to Harvard Business School in the 1970s, you know who you would have learned case studies about? Sears. Sears was the best managed retailing firm in the world, bar none. But when times changed and Sears had to change, you know what Sears couldn't do? Change. Where does this get happy again? I think Rukmini's going to bring the happiness. Let's skip this. Well, this is IBM. IBM went from 400,000 employees in 1989 to 200,000 employees in 1994. Again, I was born a long time ago. I was born in 1959. The US government sued IBM in the 1970s. You know why? Because IBM was such a monopoly and was so capable and so unchallengeable that it could never be defeated in an open market, so the government needed to break IBM up because it was a monopoly that could never fail. Well, turns out, when the reality and technology of computing changed, IBM just about died. I mean, if you have to take your organization from 400,000 employees to 200,000 employees, you're on death's door. But it took that level of challenge for even a well-managed, high-pressure, by-the-market, high-performance incentive, managed by geniuses, full of geniuses, to change themselves, to reorient themselves, and be able to regrow in a new environment. Okay, are you saying time's up right now? You want me to quit right now? 2 minutes. Okay, so let me go next. Let me talk for 2 minutes about disruption. Disruption is this concept that was invented by a man named Clay Christensen, who I happen to know, good friends with Clay Christensen. And I joke sometimes with Clay that if he had a nickel for every time the word disruption was now used, he'd be worth about half as much as he actually is. He's monetized the hell out of the word disruption. But what does he mean by disruption? I mean, now people just say it as meaning, oh, like it's disruptive. They have no idea what they're talking about. Probably this hotel talks about itself as being disruptive. Has no idea what it's talking about. What Clay Christensen had a very clear conceptual idea of what he meant by disruption, which is he means there's segments of the market, and in those segments of the market, consumers are willing to pay more for high quality. And when you start at a time when even the best firm can't meet the mainstream demand, the firm that can produce the highest quality wins. That's the winning strategy, is to be the best. And so the incumbent's strategy is called sustaining technological innovation, which is getting better at being the best. Okay? Sooner or later, the sustaining strategy moves far beyond what the typical consumer wants, and all of a sudden there's a potential for a disruptive strategy, which is actually worse. And again, this is what's now lost. People don't distinguish between disruption, meaning it's actually worse, and disruptive, meaning it's just a change. Because you could have a disruptive technological change that just made it enormously better from the top. But what disruptive change means is you go to worse to get better. So let's apply that to, I think, the key problem those of us in this room face, which is the next slide, which is, if you think of where, here's the fundamental kind of, in my view, problem, is those that work in and around the education sector think they're the yellow line. They think they're behind the global frontier, but not that far behind it that they can't imitate it and get to it in a sustaining way. Meaning, we're going to become the best by copying the best at what the best does. That's our strategy for getting better, is we're going to look at the best, and we're going to fly to Finland, we're going to talk to the Finns, and we're going to come back and we're going to do Finland in Tanzania. That's what the education establishment thinks it's doing. And it thinks it's at the yellow line. It's really at the red line. It's nowhere near the yellow line. Its actual quality is incredibly worse than it ever allows itself to admit. And so all of the flying to Finland is just complete, total figment of the imagination horseshit. It's not going to work. It's not going to have any impact on anything. And their actual trajectory is the red line. They're getting worse. So they're flying to Finland saying, how do I teach white kids with teachers with master's degrees? When the reality is they don't have white kids from advantaged backgrounds showing up to school to be taught by teachers with master's degrees. Which means since they're ignoring the reality gets worse, which means disruption comes in. But when disruption comes in, everybody who is in the educational establishment is going to tell you that you're not doing the right thing because you're not on the yellow trajectory. They're going to say what you're doing is worse and what we're doing is better because we're doing what's worked in Finland and what we're doing is best practice. And since they control the publications, they control the profession, they control the conferences, they control the money, they're going to be able to dominate the discourse. And they're going to try and buffalo you into pretending you're yellow, and you're not yellow, you're red, and from red, blue is an improvement. And that's what I think the mentality has to be. How does one set about a disruptive change when the market is dominated by a public sector that's delusional about where it is and is delusional about what's possible? I'm going to quit right there because she wants me to, and because I think you want me to, because I think you've heard about enough. And you'll ask me in the Q&A why I have a paper straw with me. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we were all ready for that. I mentioned that there'll be lots of provocation, and now we've been labeled as a disruptive insurgency. So here to hear more about that and beyond, I have the pleasure of asking Dr. Rukmini Banerjee, our second keynote speaker, to come join us here. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham Education Foundation and has been the godmother of the People's Action for Learning Network. She was director of Azhar Center, trained as an economist, and really it is so difficult to describe Rukmini because you can say something for her now, but she's moved on. All of us are dying to hear what Rukmini has to say, especially after what Lant had to say. Rukmini.
I'm not sure I should say thank you to Lant, but nothing has changed. In fact, things have gotten worse. And I think there could be a no better way to start this conference than to think of the red dotted line at the bottom of Lant's last slide. But before I go there, I want to just say namaste, namaskar, salam alaikum. It's a great pleasure. We couldn't even attend the last conference, which didn't happen because of all kinds of problems. And so the fact that we are here, I think, is a huge accomplishment. As I was sitting on the stage when the minister was here, and Rajiv was talking about his childhood, which is far more recent than my childhood, I was also thinking about my childhood. We had something that looked similar to this. I think many of you, at least for my generation and from my part of the world, where we put all the, to call it a bed is going too far, we call it chowki, little wooden things that we sleep on together in your grandmother's house to do a performance. And it looks kind of like this. This is a nicer version because it's a fancy hotel, but it looks like this. And if you were going to perform on it and do a dance, you were very careful not to step on the cracks because you might go through. And so I'm very happy to be here. We've come a long way since those red chowkis on which we had to do little dances. But nothing has changed in the world and we're still on the red line. And so I would say that Lant has given us two major challenges. I'm going to move this because it's a bit too much on the precipice here. One is, I think he is saying very politely, which is very unlike Lant, Who are you? And how are you different? You started off by being different, and are you still different? And I think that's a very important question, at least for the PAL network core members to really think. Having been, along with many of my colleagues from India, right there from before the birth of all of this, I naturally feel very strongly about who we are. That could be just our view, but I'd like to share that view with all of you and remind many people in this audience about where we began and why we began. I think number one, we began on the ground. We began where the problem was. And I can say that at least from my colleagues and me from Pratham, at some point 20 years ago, we stopped doing whatever we were doing in education and felt we had to completely do a controlled alt reboot and start again. We could see kids having difficulties, but we were not able to adequately deal with it. And I think that's the birth of a lot of things that at least we were doing today. And one of the key issues at that point was trying to understand the core of the problem and trying to understand it in a way that not just you and I understood it, but the families of the children understood it, the neighbors understood it, and people who interacted with the children understood it. And so I think that our learning path and our growing path has been quite different from many other traditional ways in which education has expanded. I remember many years ago, when my hair was not white, being in a village. This was the early days of this trying to figure it out. And we were asking kids to read. And there was this lady in the village, an old lady, a grandma, who called me and she said, "What are you doing?" And in true arrogance of people who, think that they know what they're doing, I said, "I'm doing a survey." And she started laughing. And I've never forgotten her laugh or her look. She was illiterate. She was probably a great-grandmother. And she laughed and she said, "You're not doing a survey." And her laugh indicated you didn't even know what you're doing, and you're doing it. And so I had to stop because, I thought I knew kind of what I was doing, but I couldn't articulate it to her. And she smiled again and she said, "You are doing something really important." So a survey is not important. Research is not important. What is important is what you're doing. And what you're doing is important because usually you people come from outside and you don't know, and we have to tell you, which is the definition of a survey. People who don't know come, they ask questions to people on the ground who tell them, and then they put it together in some nice report and release it. So, but this is different because what you are doing, you don't know, we don't know, and we are figuring it out together. And to me, that has always remained. Often people ask us, "Are you doing research?" And I usually say no. For this reason. We often don't get funded to be a think tank because what we are doing apparently is not thinking. Because the doing is way more important. And I think some of these things have to stay with us because that is where we started. We started doing this because we needed to figure out at the core what was the problem. We needed to do it in a way that my grandmother could understand it. Actually, she understood it well before I did. And we needed to do it in a way that people could feel the problem and want to do something about it. This is, as I think Lant very evocatively said, this is not somebody else's problem. This is our problem. And therefore, giving the problem a name and a picture that everybody can resonate with is really important. I worry when things become alphabets. I worry when they become numbers. A huge problem like this, which is holding up the whole world, cannot be called SDG 4.1.3.5. Because then it's very difficult to relate to that problem. If we go to the next slide, this is what we are all about. We are not about a neat and tidy pen and paper, let's do this data collection, let us put it in a report, let's publish it, let's have an inauguration. This is what we are about, and this thing may look different in different countries, but the core of it is the same, that what we are doing is we are doing something really important to get to the core of what our children need. We didn't learn this by going to conferences. We have to remember this. I have nothing against conferences, but we didn't learn it by going to conferences. We learned it by visiting each other in the field. And thanks to being part of this great family, I've had the opportunity, as have many of my colleagues, to go to, let's say, a madrasa in Senegal, to go to a village in Uganda. We've had the pleasure of having people from different parts of the world come and visit us in our villages. And I think that's how we learned. We learned from experiencing each other's experiences. And those experiences were dirty, they were dusty. I remember with early professor from Tanzania, we sat on a string cot in a village in UP in India. The string cot broke and we both fell down. And I think we learned many things. We didn't just learn about reading and math. We didn't just learn about what children can do or not do. I think underlying all of this, at least I learned a lot about what does democracy mean, what does it really mean to have opportunity, and how slow we are really to make these kinds of things available for all our children. And so I think we should remember that our ways of learning have been different, our ways of growing have been different. We didn't go to London and New York and Paris to learn these things. We learned it by crossing difficult oceans. We have borders that are very difficult to cross, and yet after 10 years, despite all of this, we have been together. So we are different. Hopefully land, and our identity will remain. We took from each other voluntarily and we gave to each other voluntarily. Nobody told us you have to be in a particular framework. We took what suited us from each other for our own needs on the ground, and we adapted it. I think large parts of agriculture have moved like this. Nobody did a framework to see that you have to fit into this. And you took what made sense for you to take for your family, for your neighborhood, and for your country. Today, if we are moving towards a common assessment as part of what we do, it's because we together have decided that may make sense to do today. So I think the translatability, the flexibility has been very important. This is a completely different global model from the global models that dominate us today. And I think we have to be mindful of that. This is a voluntary coming together of people. In our people group, there are all kinds of people. There are people who are proper professors, like Felipe and Samana, like Professor Abdu, like, well, Willema is a professor also, Sarah. But there are also people who have nothing to do with universities. I, for example, am never called in India to speak in a university because what we do is not research and it is not high level. It is very ground level. And so we are a collection of people who are very varied, but who are held together because the common core of what we believe is very strong. And I think that this diversity has to remain because it brings into it a whole set of other energies. The problem is, our problem is really important because the solutions, and I think that one of the wonderful things about Land is that he can put on a picture on the stage things that perhaps are much more difficult to explain, that your yellow line and your red line almost have to be animated, because I think what it does is really tell you that completely you're on the wrong path. And while we have not improved, and while I think a lot of things that we are doing is just getting worse, it's still important to be reminded that that's in a different space than where we think or where the world thinks we are going. I think together, the PAL network, the members, we have at least ensured that the way we do things is recognized somewhere in the world. I remember a conference in Washington, Sarah may remember it as well, where the World Bank actually gave us space, and maybe I don't know if I should call it the World Bank, or I should say it was Beth King, who actually gave us space to Sarah and me, who, as you can see, we are very colorful in many different ways, to sit in a room where everybody else was what I would call men in black. These were the PISA, the TIMS, the PEARLs, the people who have controlled what is called assessment in the world, and they were not particularly happy that there was a viewpoint like ours that was being given so much space in that setting. And the space that we were getting was on very many key issues. The space that we were getting or we were taking was to say it is senseless to do a pen and paper test when children cannot read. It is completely unethical to do that. And hence, when I see this big push to do pizza all over the world, it just amazes me that people don't see the ethical side of this. That if you have children, now I see it from landslide in Indonesia. We are used to that in India or in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, to say there are kids who have finished 8 years of school and there is still 25–30% who cannot read. To ask them to do a pen and paper test is absolutely unethical. And before I get much older, I'm going to take a case to the International Court of Justice against PISA, because I think that this is destroying many, many things that really need to be done. Rather than showing that you are only at one end of the distribution, I think the entire enterprise, if you really want to help children and you want to help them in a meaningful way, is almost wrong. So what to measure and how to measure is not just assessment. I think there are many very important principles below it, which are fundamentally based on what do you think is democracy, how do you think young people will have adequate opportunity to even achieve a bare minimum, and what is ethical for the world to do. There is large amounts of money in the world being spent on education. And I think it's high time to think that if the real line is that red line, is that money being spent in any way that is useful? I think there are ethical questions there as well. So I would say that in our whole family, in the way that we have evolved over 10 years, we are different. We need to continue to be different. These are not easy conversations to have. I remember in 2 or 3 different ways that this process, whether it's in the ground level or on the high level, cannot be smooth. And I worry sometimes when things look too easy, it means you've lost the edge. Because this is whatever, Land has much nicer words, disruptive, insurgency, whatever it is, it's when you hit against something which is very solid that you feel the pressure. If you're smoothly going through, it means there is something that you're not really, big change is not happening. At the ground level, I remember this incident where there was this man, he had 3 sons, and again, we were in a village and we were going house to house, and I went to his house, and he looked at me very disdainfully with my little Asar tool, which everybody knows, but we should still see it, put on the next one. And when I showed this tool to him, then no, go back. He looked at it and said, give it, his 3 sons went to private school. This is in UP. He looked at it very disdainfully and said, show this to the children, the poor children who go to government schools. So we said, we will. We are going to everyone's house, but how about we ask your sons to do it? I remember still, it was afternoon, he was lying down. The first son was in, I think, 3rd grade. He came up to about the letter level. And so the man got up a little bit on his elbow and he said, oh, well, he's still too young. That's why he can't do it. The next son was in 5th grade, did not move beyond the word level. This is a man who is sending all his 3 children to private school, paying, maybe not high fees, but certainly paying fees. When the kid in 5th standard couldn't read it, he sort of sat up. He did not let me test his older kid who was in 7th, because by this time he was on his feet. And I think he was very disturbed because he didn't know whether he should go and start, slapping the teachers, or whether it's himself that he should slap. So I think it's disturbing at your personal level that you've actually thought you're doing the best you can for your children, and it's simply not good enough. And I think that's what countries need to feel, that you're doing the best, but it's not going anywhere, and hence something totally different needs to be done. When the 1st or 2nd or maybe the 3rd Asar report came back in India, and for those who know about our history, it's still a very contested exercise. There are many parts of the government who still don't like it at all. And I remember again being in the office of our biggest state, UP, and talking to the head bureaucrat. And as we were talking, because UP shows up very poorly in the Asar results, he picked up the phone and he called his counterpart in Tamil Nadu, which is a very advanced state. And he said, and I could only hear this part of the conversation, he picked up the phone and he said, have you seen the Asar report? Either this report is completely rubbish, they don't know what they're doing, but if that is not the case, then we need to stop doing what we are doing and really rethink. And his point was that the entire country is following some theory of change, some logical pathway to doing what is best in education. You get all your teachers in place, you get the schools built, you get the textbooks on time, you provide midday meals, and you hope for the best. And that's what you know how to do as a big government. Tamil Nadu has done this 20 years ago, and their reading levels look just like UP. And UP thought, maybe UP was not following Finland, it was certainly following Tamil Nadu, that that's where we will get to. And here comes out a whole exercise which says it doesn't matter. All of these things don't matter. So it has to be disturbing if you have to redo things and to think differently. And I think that that's the push that we need to continue to make. Bela is already waving sheets at me, but I'm going to ignore her for a bit because I haven't come all this way here to just stand here for 2 minutes. So, we are here in Nepal, and I think one of the symbols of Nepal, right, is the sun and the moon, both. And I love it because I think that we are both used to the sun and moon. To me, the assessment part of what we do here at the PAL network or in Pratham is the moon, which maybe shows you, depending on which time you look at the moon, whether it's gloom or doom or shine. And then I think there's a big part which is the sun. And I'm not saying, and I have much more enlightened people in the audience as well as right here who have evidence for what the world can do or not do. But I do think that we as a group that really care about the core problem have a big responsibility towards the sun as well. And I think that, all of this has to be translated, whether on large scale or on small scale, into ways of showing the world that this solution is possible. How that solution then can get into a bigger place may be different. I think it also has to translate into solutions that ordinary people can do. I remember talking to a mother in some part of India, not far from here, where she said that to me, I showed her this tool and I said, tell me where your child is at. Because if at the core of it, a parent cannot relate to this, no policy can come and fall on you and make you change. And she said, I can't tell you because I'm not educated. So I said, look at it as a picture. Tell me what you think your child can do, because your child goes to school, there's stuff that he brings to school and brings back that maybe looks like this. And with great difficulty, she agreed that probably what's on the left is the highest level, and probably those things which are just there on their own are the simplest. So I asked her a question. I said, when your child is sick, what do you do? And she had many things she did. And she could describe them. You put your hand here, if it's hot, you do some things at home, you watch it for a couple of days. If that doesn't improve, then you go to a government clinic. If that doesn't help, you go to She had a whole pathway. So I said, do you have a medical degree? Do you have an MBBS? And she said, you're making fun of me again. And I said, I'm not. Because as an uneducated mother, you are taking many informed choices about how to help the health of your child. But as the same mother, why are you not able to do all of those things for your child's education? And I think the reason she doesn't do it is because educated people have told her to stay out. Send your child to my school and I will fix the problem. Because you are not capable of handling your own child's education because you are not educated. Luckily, the health people have not told her that. And therefore, she can engage on the health. A big responsibility of the entire education effort, wherever we are doing it, is to be able to include people, the real people who can help in this problem. And I think just throwing big policies down is not necessarily the only way to do it. Sending them to a building, which is called a school, I think is not necessarily the only way to do it. So I would say that the process of spreading our solution, to me, at least for this group of people, is going to be very similar to the ways in which we have reached a common understanding of the problem. It is going to be a people-to-people infection, and it's going to be a people-to-people inspiration. In India, in Pratham, we look at it in a certain way, and if you can just go to the next slide. This is the way that we talk about the results of the Asar survey or of any measurement. And I'd like to spend a few minutes on this, because this is the simplest way. This is what all of India sees from the village level up to the highest level. And what does it say? What it says is, if you look at grade 5, there is about 50% kids who can read at the second grade level. What should that number be? What should the number be? Come on.
That should be 100%.
This is very lukewarm. What should that number be? 100. What should the number be at the third grade level? 100. I mean, the bottom line is, if that number is not close to 100 on the top right-hand corner, there is no point in doing anything with these kids afterwards. Slide after slide that Land has been publishing says that. And it is very confusing to me why the bigwigs of education, both in countries and in the world, have not woken up to the problem, to the issue that if you have not been able to fix the fact that by the end of third grade, if children are not reading and not doing basic arithmetic, nothing is going to happen to them afterwards. No empowerment, no livelihood, no economic development is possible. And therefore, rather than wasting our time worrying about whether we will be part of PISA and part of something else, this is the problem from household to household, from village to village, from school to school that we need to solve. And frankly, and maybe I'm running out of time because my hair is white, I have no faith that some large bureaucratic system is going to actually be able to solve the problem unless there is some fire under their seat to make them do it. And perhaps where we have failed entirely is not converting this into a political issue where people win and lose elections on this matter. Perhaps that's the only way that on a large scale this will change. So very quickly, I would say that if you are going to change this situation, it means moving an entire distribution to the right. This is a very low level of where we are going. You can call it minimum proficiency. But if we really focus on how to do this, I suspect it will change the entire business of education. This whole thing about how we test kids in higher levels, how we build curriculum, if a whole system and a whole society actually gets down to moving all the numbers to making sure that the right-hand side uppermost cell is close to 100, I think it will change what we call education today. And the more this remains the same, the more likely it is that nothing is ever going to change. In Pratham, we do things a certain way. And I would say that, some of my colleagues will slap me when I get off the stage to say perhaps that's only one of the ways in which to do it. And that is to say that a traditional school system is built by rows. An age and grade is a row, and you plant a certain expected curriculum, which in some countries may be more realistic than others, about what you expect a particular age and a particular grade to do. In our country, that expectation is completely faulty. Whatever you're expecting kids to do has nothing to do with the reality of how we are making them do. And so in Pratham, what we do is we reorganize this grid. Rather than as rows, we organize it in columns, which means that given the existing teachers in a school or in an after-school program or volunteers in a village, it is easier for me to take kids 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, group them temporarily by the level at which they are, and then move them to the next level and the next level. We've been doing this for 20 years, and today we can bring this change. We as Pratham can bring about a change and move kids into that last column in 30 or 40 days, working 2 hours a day. So we have a solution. We have a solution, the solution works, and we've worked at getting it to be as effective as possible. It doesn't need a name. What it means is the effectiveness at being able to show durably that this problem is not an insoluble problem, and common and ordinary people can solve it. But having demonstrated it, you have to convince many other people that this is the way to go. Because it takes a very fundamental assumption of the education system that you need to organize children by grade and age. By reorganizing them in a different way, you're actually shaking the foundations of how you build school systems across the world. That's not easy. And people resist that because you're used to having your 10-year-old in 5th grade, whatever the 5th grade may mean, and you don't like to be told that your 5th grader today is in this group. The thing about this grouping is, if you are successful, nobody's in a group for more than 10 days. It's not a permanent place where you're going to be for the rest of your life. It's a temporary place. Till you learn how to run, you're going to be walking, and you're going to go walking quite quickly. So I'd like to just end by showing you 1 or 2 more things, if you go to the next one, that in bringing about the solution, there are many steps. But the first step for each one of ourselves is to make sure that we understand the core of the problem and that my understanding leads me to do the action that's most appropriate. And the action that I do has to be, to me, to myself, very convincing. I need to move my children to be reading, and they should be durably reading, 5 years from now. Because once a kid learns to read, they can even fuel themselves to go further. And then comes the many other things, which are, I think, what Lant was referring to, much trickier. But how do you get larger organizations and larger systems? How do you penetrate those? How do you inhabit those? And what do you change? And all I can say that this is not done, this kind of change is not done through better manuals, better training, or better workshops. I think this needs a whole other kind of exercise. I want to just end by thanking 3 people. One is the immigration officer in the Delhi airport yesterday when I was coming. So he asked me, where are you going? And my family is always perturbed because all kinds of people seem to talk to me about what I'm doing, but they don't talk to the rest of my family. So the immigration guy says, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to a conference in Kathmandu. He said, what's the conference about? I said, it's about primary education. The immigration guy said, all education is primary, because if you don't achieve that primary, you should stop the rest of the education. So I asked him to write a letter to our Prime Minister to say this, because this is very common wisdom. If you don't have your foundation right, don't bother with the rest. The second guy I'm remembering today is somebody who was at the border of India and Pakistan the last time that we could cross over. And Bela was supposed to pick us up, but the car to pick us up hadn't come. So we were sitting in the room of this man who was probably the intelligence guy there. And so he asked me, so what do you do? So I told him what I do, and in Hindi I said, हम कोशिश करते हैं कि बच्चे पढ़ने लगे. We are trying to make sure that children read. So he looked at me very patiently and says, how long have you been trying this? And I said, like Lant did, I've been trying it for the last 20 years. So he gave me a cup of tea and he said, if you haven't succeeded, you should stop, because it's clear that you're not going to succeed. I think these are very important words. But obviously, because I have to end on a good note before your coffee, I had a phone call about 2 months ago from some unknown number. And sometimes I pick up these calls and sometimes I don't. But that day I was bored, so I thought, let me pick it up. It's usually car salesmen, insurance, and other such things. But this was a young man who said that he'd been at some talk that I had given. And he was very frank. He said, Madam, you spoke many things, and you speak very fast, so I didn't pick up many things. But I picked up 3 things. And the 3 things were, you need to do something about children's foundational learning. Hallelujah, I'm glad he got that. Number 2, you need to keep it simple. And number 3, you need to do it very quickly because we are running out of time. And even if anybody or anywhere that I speak takes away these 3, I think we've succeeded. It so happens that this young man is today responsible for all of Bombay's schools. And so this is a good thing, because there's some hope there that some system change will happen in some form or fashion. But I'd like to just, I keep saying this is a trick, to keep saying I'm ending, so Bela keeps sitting down every time I say this. So I really am ending. I think that I didn't plan this with Lant. If we had, we would have done a better job together. But the map that you put up, Lant, of your missionaries and your Catholics and Muslims and whatnot, I think it's an important one. I think that the model or the spirit that we need to take doesn't come from education training programs. It has to come from the way missionaries operate. Because in this job of moving from spreading the understanding of the problem to spreading the power of the solution, you're going to need persistence. You all know that already. You're going to need some unending source of passion, because this is not a simple short business. And finally, I think we're going to need a big chunk of being practical. If a door is open, get into it. Don't worry if the next door is open or not. And 3 things again that we need to keep in mind. Already our hands are doing a good job. We know how to assess, we know how to put it together. Many of us are beginning the first steps of what do you do to effective action. But your hands have to be connected to your head. If you don't understand what is the core of the problem, and if you are doing something because somebody gave you a good manual of teacher activities to do, it's not going to make a difference. So what you're doing has to be connected with your understanding of what the core problem is, which is why I like the sheet that we have, because it goes straight from the assessment to the action and is linked to it. And finally, I think, if in your heart you don't believe that all children can learn, all of this is a waste. So as you go for coffee, please remember Land's red dotted line. I like to summarize. I've been a teacher before because, I could have said many things and it didn't stick. Remember Land's dotted line? That's the red dotted line. It's not just a crisis. According to me, it's the end of the world. And it's not enough to say we need to do something about it. If we don't do, there's no point in doing anything about education. SDGs are all fine, they have their own place for people who are living in Washington and wherever, in New York and Paris and so on. But that SDG 4.1.1a is the only thing that matters. And it's called, can children read, can they do basic arithmetic? And the more we talk about it in those terms, the easier it will be for the world to understand. And the final thing is that we do have a special role. As a group of people who have come together voluntarily from across the world, it is our responsibility to be able to share a easy-to-do solution for this problem on some scale. Many things that need to be done don't get money. I don't know who funded the work of the map that you showed, the missionaries that went from here to there. But I think work gets done when your hand and your heart and your head are all together. So thank you.
Land, can we have you and Rukmani here? I do have a confession and apologize, but because we began about at 9:15, we don't have our promised 20 minutes, but we have time for about 3 to 4 questions. And do we have someone out there with a mic? Burning questions, and remember both of them are going to be here for today and tomorrow, and we've got lots of opportunities to ask many more questions. Any burning questions? We can take up to 3. Said, can you just say who you are and ask a question? Sadly, we don't have time for long comments.
Thank you. My name is Said Ahmed. I'm from Bangladesh.
And do let us know if you have a question from one of the 2 keynote speakers.
Yes. So,
A mic here.
my question is, taking from the red dot line from red and thinking about Rukmini Banerjee saying that the 4.1.1 rule, all of us, when we saw that that the government officials only few, but most of the citizens are doing. What do you suggest that for the 4.1.1, when we will monitor it, if the civil society cannot take part in it, and how do we monitor and how do we contribute in measuring that we are achieving it as a civil society, not as a government?
Thank you. A second question, right at the back first, please. Okay.
Hello.
Say who you are.
My name is Sikandar Bizinjo. I'm from Pakistan. It was wonderful to hear both of you. My question is that you both are asking do something different if it's not working, go for disruption and whatnot. But the governments, particularly in South Asia, countries like Pakistan, the inertia and the bureaucracy and the status quo are very dominant. How do we start the pitch to them?
How do we start?
The pitch to them, like if something is not working.
Bureaucracy and one more. I was trying to, maybe a lady right here in the front, please. Didn't we wish to be all questions from here, but that's how it is.
I'm Abdul Hamid from Pakistan. Oh. I have a participant here who is deaf, hard of hearing, and this thing is not accessible to him.
Sorry?
There is a participant who is deaf.
Okay, so we don't have sign language here.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have to make it accessible.
Absolutely, point well taken. The third question.
Joyce from Boston. I just wanted to follow up on the question of the main actors and where the money is. That those people are completely locked up in that old system of thinking. And a lot of times it sounds like we are talking to ourselves and they are not hearing us. Could you just give us some examples of where, because we can move something and we are moving things. But we cannot really move the bigger ship without, how do we get there? How do we move? And as you say, time is running out and we have lost several generations. What do we do with the agency of the matter and the people that should be on the table? And they are on the table with their mouth, they are accepted with SDGs, that the children are not learning, but they also stop there and they go back to their old way of practicing. What do we do and how do we move from, you are preaching to the converted. What about those guys who have done 1% work?
So we'll have to stop at that. 3 questions on how do you monitor 4.1.1. A, the question of governance and how do you give the pitch to the people who make big decisions. And the third one that you just heard from Joyce on how do you leapfrog change and action. Both of you, perhaps you can, or both of you could grab at that.
I mean, I'm only going to repeat what I said because everything I know I already said. Said. To me, the thing is that, yes, how does big change come about and what is our view of how do we bring about the big change? Now, yesterday was November 4th. City where I live, Delhi, has 13-14 million people. They have instituted, the government has instituted, because of the pollution problem, the fact that you can drive your odd and even cars. 14 million people are obeyed. There was no training program, there was no home-to-home canvassing, but if the problem is felt, I think people are willing to do things. So if there are people who are sitting at the table but not responding to the fact that children are not learning, it's clear that somewhere the urgency or the pinch of the problem is not being felt. To me, any country, anywhere, has all kinds of people. There are some who are sitting inside buildings with files on desks, have pots of money, and there are many people outside. And all of us have experiences of seeing how many people can be mobilized to do certain things. So perhaps our view that the world will change by changing the sector plans or the planning documents may be misplaced. Maybe there are other ways in which we need to tackle this problem, because the standard way of writing proposals and them going to the next step and then being approved, maybe that's not the way to do it. It would be easy if you could unlock all of that potential and put it in here. But I think that if after 10 years we feel, like the man in Pakistan who told me, why are you trying if you're not succeeding, that we need to change ways in which we are operating. To us in Pratham, at least, it was very important right from the beginning to have cheap ways of operating. Not because we don't like money, but because we knew that money is very difficult to come by. And therefore, to be able to do things with ordinary people, using ordinary methods, I think is really important. So I don't have any answers. I think to Saeed's question, to ask at the household level, at the village level, is it okay that your children can't read? Are you willing to do something about it? Unless there is that understanding, measuring it doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants an answer to a question they haven't asked. So I think the big thing is to ask, to make many more people ask, why is this change not happening? The second thing is you've got to include people. The mother that I spoke about doesn't feel she can do anything about reading because people have told her, you're illiterate and nothing can be done on your side. So I think as a network, we have a lot of work to do with people. We call ourselves the people, whatever, action, something, right? So we've got to believe in that it's the people who are going to make the change.
Thank you,
So I'm going to try and respond to, say, the pitch to government question by starting by saying everybody says that it's hard to get the government to change because governments are always risk averse, right? They don't want to do anything risky. And we need to completely change our mentality about that. because in fact governments have no risk aversion to failure at all. They can fail year after year after year, and failure doesn't create risk. So the first thing to government is you've got to pitch to them both that you have something that they can do that will immediately be seen as a success, right? And at the same time, undermine their ability to fail without risk. I remember I learned this very painfully because I was working in India in 2004. The first ASA results had come out showing that I think in Andhra Pradesh in grade 4, 11% of kids who could read. And when I proposed that maybe the locally elected Panchayat Raj institutions could play a bigger role in the schools, my education in the World Bank counterpart said, no, those they're so weak and they don't know what to do. It would be a huge risk to get them involved. And I said, you're joking, right? You've got 11% of kids who can read and you're saying something's a risk? What's the risk? It's going to fall to 10? It's going to fall to 9? You're fucking failing completely and totally as it is, and you're talking to me that you can't take risk? So, you gotta first guarantee success of a dimension. Sorry about using the F word, everybody, I apologize. Fortunately, it wasn't signed into sign language, or it would have been even more graphic. So, which gets to the second question, which is, I think part of it has to start with a clear delegation in the system sense. Part of the problem is people haven't agreed upon what the system of education is actually about. So the problem is, and I remember, is that in our system structure that we use within RISE, and which it starts in some sense from a delegation. What is it that people are being told they should accomplish? And the major problem with education systems is it's not at all clear that they are being told their main thing they should accomplish is child learning. They're being told they should be in compliance with a whole set of rules. They're being told there's a whole list of inputs that need to be in place. They're being told that they're supposed to be teaching a curriculum that they know they have no possible chance of doing all of. And so the delegation is unclear. The delegation is overambitious. The delegation has, too many non-critical path elements in it. So if I ask, where would you start with the system reform in a way that might have traction at then kicking off? It's getting clarity on a simple learning goal that we are going to pursue relentlessly and for which we can generate public understanding and support. And from there, then you can start to work backwards. But as it is, since the delegation's unclear, most people, most of the time, are in compliance mode. And in compliance mode, nothing's going to work, essentially.
Thank you. 3 great questions, 3 great further provocations, and something to think about. The 2 days are going to be about stories, evidence, more provocations and inspirations, and I hope that this is, the 2 keynotes have been great framers, including what the Minister said about initiatives in Nepal. We are running a bit late, we started a bit late, so we are going to eat a little bit into our tea, but a huge round of applause to both Wilbury and Land. And I also wanted to acknowledge at the outset, on behalf of the PAL Network, the supporters of this conference, UK Aid, DFID, Hewlett Foundation, Center for Sustainable Development, the Earth Institute, Columbia University, ACER, Education Equity Research Initiative, Wellspring Philanthropic Fund, and the Real Center, University of Cambridge. A big round of applause to our supporters. So we we've come officially to the end of the inaugural session. I'd like very much for our two PAL network members to come and give a small offering to both our keynote speakers. And a huge round of applause to the PAL network team members who've put this conference together and worked day and night. They're all over the place. So thank you very much for being patient. And we come to the end of a wonderful inaugural session, and I hope there'll be lots of conversations and lots of exciting times here in Nepal, Kathmandu. We officially have our tea break now. Thank you.